And let's finish the 9th chapter of the Wolves of Willoughby Chase. So, Bonnie and Sylvia, with the help of Simon, have escaped from Mrs. Brisket's, and while Sylvia recovered, they stayed at the Smithies. Now they are on the road again. The journey to London took them nearly 2 months. They had to go at goose pace, for in the daytime the geese flew out of the cart and wandered along as they chose, pecking at any edible thing by the roadside, and as Simon explained, "There's no sense in hurrying geese, or by the time we reach Smithfield they'll be thin and scrawny, and nobody will buy them." "Anyway," said Bonnie, "supposing Mrs. Brisket and Miss Slycop have set people searching for us, the search will surely have died down by the end of 2 months." So they made their leisurely way, picking flowers, of which they found more and more as spring advanced, and they travelled farther south, watching birds, and stopping to bathe and splash in moorland brooks. At night they usually camped near a farm, or sleeping in or under the cart in their warm goose-feather quilts. If it rained, farmers offered them shelter in a barn or haymow. Often a kindly farmer's wife invited them in for a plate of stew, and sped them on their way with a baking of pastries and apple dumplings. In return, Sylvia did exquisite darning, Bonnie helped with housework, and Simon, who could turn his hand to anything, ploughed or milked, or sawed wood, or mended broken tools. Pattern had smuggled 1 or 2 books and Bonnie's paint box from the attic out to the cart with food and clothes, and these were a great resource on rainy evenings in the hay. They read aloud to each other, and Simon, who had never bothered about reading before, learned how, and even pronounced it quite a handy accomplishment. He also took a keen pleasure in making use of Bonnie's box of colours, and sometimes could hardly be torn away from some view of a crag or waterfall that he was busy sketching. The girls would wander slowly on with Caroline, the cart and the geese, until Simon finished at last, caught them up at a run with the colour box under his arm, and the painting held out at arm's length to dry. Sylvia and Bonnie thought his pictures were beautiful, but Simon was always dissatisfied with them, and would give them away to any passer-by who admired them. Several times people pressed money on him for them, and once, when they were stopping overnight in a little village named Beckside, the landlord of the inn, the Snake and Ladder, who had seen one of the sketches, asked if Simon would repaint his faded inn sign. So they spent a pleasant day at the village, feeding like gamecocks at the innkeeper's table on roast duck and apple cheesecake, while Simon painted a gorgeous green and gold serpent twined in the rungs of a pruning ladder. "Should you like to be a painter, do you think, Simon?" Sylvia asked. "I might," he confessed. "I'd never thought of such a trade before, though there is a lot to learn, and I doubt I'd never have the money for a teacher." Bonnie opened her lips to speak, but then checked herself, sighing. Late in April they came to the top of Hampstead Hill, among the grey old houses and the young green ones. At the foot of the hill they could see the village of Chalk Farm, and far away the great city of London spread out with its blue veil of smoke and its myriads of spires and chimneys. Sylvia felt a quickening of her heart to think she was so close to her dear Aunt Jane again. How pleased the old lady would be to see her beloved little niece. They camped that night on Hampstead Heath, near a tribe of gypsies, and indeed they looked like gypsies themselves. Bonnie and Simon were as brown as berries, and their black locks were decidedly in want of cutting, even Sylvia would hardly have been recognized for the thin, pale, fair child who had set out to Willoughby Chase so many months ago. Her cheeks were pink, and her hair, though not its original length yet, was thick and shining and reached to her shoulders. They found an obliging dairyman in Hampstead village who was willing to keep Caroline and the cart for them in his stable, and next day they drove the geese down into London. "You girls had best not come to Smithfield Market," said Simon. "It's a rough, wild place, not fit for little maids." "I've been thinking," suggested Bonnie, "how would it be if we tried to find Mr. Gripe's office while you were at market? Sylvia, can you tell us where lawyers' offices in London are usually to be found?" Sylvia said she thought they were in the region of Chancery Lane. Having inquired the way of a constable, therefore, the girls accompanied Simon as far as Lincoln's Inn Fields, and there he left them with Goosey and Gandry, the 2 parent geese, who were never sold, while he went on to dispose of the rest of the flock. Bonnie and Sylvia wandered along outside the houses that surrounded the fields and saw, on brass door plates, the names of many attorneys, barristers, and commissioners for oaths, but nowhere that of Mr. Gripe. At about midday, when tired, they were lying sunning themselves on the grass and eating sliced beef and lemon tarts procured at a nearby cook shop. Bonnie suddenly exclaimed, "Look, Sylvia! Isn't that Mr. Grimshaw?" A portly, middle-aged man was walking across the grass toward a nearby archway. Sylvia scrutinized him closely and whispered, "Yes, I am almost sure it is he. But if he would turn his head this way—" "We must follow him and find out," said Bonnie decidedly. "If he too is in London, we shall have to be on our guard." The two children got up, calling their geese, walked fast, but not so as to attract his attention. After the gentleman in question, he passed through the archway, descended some steps, and turned into a small street, where he stopped outside one of the houses. "Perhaps it is his residence," whispered Sylvia. They approached slowly. Unfortunately, a large black cat was seated on the pavement, and if there was one animal that Goosey abominated, it was a cat. He sat up, a voracious honking and cackling, and the gentleman, in the act of ringing the doorbell, turned his head and looked at the two girls. His eyes passed over Bonnie, but he stared very sharply at Sylvia for an instant, and the door opened and he was admitted. "Oh, mercy!" exclaimed Sylvia. "Do you think he recognized me? For it was undoubtedly Mr. Grimshaw. I could not have sat so long opposite him in the train and been mistaken." "I am not certain if he knew you," said Bonnie uneasily. "It is possible. You are not so sunburned as Simon or I. We had better not remain in this vicinity." They were turning to go when Bonnie's quick eyes caught sight of the brass plate by the door that Mr. Grimshaw had entered. "Look, Sylvia. Abednego Gripe, attorney, father's man of business. Is it not a lucky chance?" "Is it so lucky?" said Sylvia doubtfully, as they retraced their steps along the street. "I do not like the fact that Mr. Grimshaw has gone to see him. Why can he have done so, do you suppose?" "No, you are right," Bonnie answered thoughtfully. "It is very queer. At all events, we must not go to see Mr. Gripe while Mr. Grimshaw is there. We had best wait until we have seen Aunt Jane and asked her advice." They remounted the steps and saw Simon crossing Lincoln's Inn Fields. He waved to them triumphantly. £22, girls! They fetched 14 and 8 each!" he called as soon as he came within earshot. "We are rich!" "Heavens, what a lot of money!" breathed Sylvia. "Let us be off to Aunt Jane at once," said Bonnie. "Shall you want me to come?" asked Simon diffidently. "Gracious, yes. Why ever not? I'm only poor and rough." "Oh, what nonsense!" said Bonnie, seizing his hand. "You can't come all this way with us, and then desert us now, just when things might turn out better. Sylvia, tell us how to get from here to Park Lane." They finished their 400-mile journey riding on the open upper deck of one of the new horse-drawn omnibuses, geese and all, though Sylvia did rather shudder to think what Aunt Jane would say to this, should she chance to be looking out of her window. When they arrived, Aunt Jane had many times told Sylvia no lady ever rode in an omnibus, and more particularly not on the upstairs deck. "I feel half afraid," confessed Sylvia, laughing, looking up at the familiar tall house with its Grecian columns on either side of the door, and white window boxes filled with lobelia. "Look, Bonnie, that is our window, the attic one, right up in the roof." "The window box flowers are withered," commented Simon. "So they are. That is not like Aunt Jane," said Sylvia, puzzled. "She usually waters them so carefully." The main door of the house stood open, and they went in silence up the stairs, up again, and still up. They passed the door on the 4th-floor landing. It flew open, and a young man's head popped out, exclaiming, "Is that the grocer? Have you brought my pie and turpentine?" "Oh!" In disappointment he saw Simon and Bonnie and the geese. Sylvia had impatiently gone on ahead. The young man eyed them in surprise a moment, then shut his door again. They caught up with Sylvia on the top landing. She was already tapping at Aunt Jane's attic door. "It is strange she does not answer." "Perhaps she's out shopping," suggested Simon. "But she always takes tea at this time of day." It was 5 o'clock. She could not have moved away, Bonnie said with a sinking heart. No, exclaimed Sylvia in relief. Here is the spare door key, and she always keeps under the oilcloth in case, by some mischance, she should lose her other one. She must be out after all. We will go in and surprise her on her return. She opened the door with the key, and cautioning them by laying her finger to her lips, tiptoed in. Bonnie and Simon rather shyly followed and stood hesitating in the tiny hallway while Sylvia went on into the one room which served Aunt Jane for a kitchen, parlour, and bedroom. Suddenly they heard Sylvia give a faint cry, and she came back to them white and frightened. "What is it, Sylvia?" asked Bonnie anxiously.
"Oh, it is Aunt Jane. Oh, I think she must be dreadfully ill, or is in a faint. She is there, and so thin and pale, and hardly breathing. Come quickly."
They hastened after her, Simon pausing but a moment to shut the geese out on the landing. They saw the poor old lady stretched on her bed under the jet-trimmed mantle. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was rapid and shallow.
"Aunt Jane," whispered Sylvia. "It is I, Sylvia."
There was no reply, and that's the end of Chapter 9.